Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond BMR, and I am your host, BMR, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. This show goes beyond cryptids and Bigfoot. We take you down a much deeper rabbit hole. We take on subjects beyond our very own realms and realities. We look at strange phenomenon and the unexplained, such as time travel, alien and UFO existence, strange hauntings and mysteries, as well as the paranormal. We focus on how all these rabbit holes come full circle. Tonight, my guest, Steve Stockton, Missing Persons Mysteries, 13 past midnight, joins me. Subscribe to Bigfoot Michigan Rob on YouTube, as well as Texas Front Porch on YouTube. If you like our content and want to support us, the Super Chat is open. Yes, the Super Chat's open long after the show ends. The Super Thanks is also open if you care to donate to that. You can find us on Odyssey Radio, iHeartRadio, KPNL Radio. Thanks to the lovely Selene out in Oregon for that. Make sure you hit the alert bell. The alert bell. Share us out, and please do subscribe. Thank you ever so much for that. And I gotta say, welcome to everybody. Quick note about our shows throughout the week. Mondays, Texas Front Porch, 7:30 in the East. Tuesdays, Van Buren Variety, 8 o'clock in the East, followed by Beyond BMR. That's today, 9 o'clock in the East. Jason McLean does something called Mysteries on Untold Radio AM, 10 o'clock in the East. Wednesday nights, it's the Zero Papers at 9, followed by Jason McLean Questions Everything at 10, all in the East. Thursdays, back here with me, 1 o'clock in the East, brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. 9 o'clock the same day, Blondes and Booze podcast. And then if you need more of the Blondes and the Booze, you get a little of the Woo mixed in on Friday nights, Blondes, the Booze, and the Woo. And don't forget my friend, the lovely Jessica Jones. You can find her on Spaced Out Radio on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 10 o'clock in the East. Before we get started, typically I have Tex as my sidekick. And as a lot of you may know, I hosted, along with Brandy from the Booze, we did Texas Front Porch, where Tex was live and alone in Brown Springs. Thank you to everybody that showed out for that. We're going to come back next Monday. Now, listen, it's 2 hours show, so we're going to do a little bit of what they found, what he found. He was alone in the cemetery and did some other investigations earlier. So we're going to break some of that down for you next Monday. Come check that out. And good old Tex, I gave him the day off because I got to tell you guys, good old Tex, his truck was parked about 200 yards away from the base of the cemetery. Then he walked up to the location, and then we did a 2-hour show. And I got to hand it to Tex. He walked for 2 hours through the whole show with maybe the 2 or 3 times that we all stopped and listened in. And if you guys recall, we heard some strange sounds and muffled talking. And so it was just a fantastic show. And I can't wait to go over the audio on that. So that'll be next Monday. We'll on Texas Front Porch. We'll check that out. The Super Chat's open. Please turn on your alert bell, and we're going to get this thing rolling. I'm going to bring up Steve Stockton here. And there he is. Your mic is muted.
There we go. Thought I had it unmuted. How you doing, BMR? Good to see you. Good to be here.
Well, Steve, thanks so much on such short notice. I had somebody planned for today, and I do not hold any ill will. It was something came up, and I said, hey, I understand. I'll reschedule you. But the thing about it was a busy day for me, so I'm scrambling around to find a guest. Now, I've got my bag of tricks. There's always somebody that I can bring on. But, I've been doing that. I said, look, I'm going to give Steve a call, see if he's doing anything, because I know you've been promoting 13 past midnight on YouTube, and you've got a lot of great stuff on there. And so, yep, you said you weren't doing anything. So I am most grateful that you could come on and join me here this
Oh,
evening.
it's always a pleasure. Yeah, it worked out perfect. I didn't have anything to do tonight. I was trying to figure out what I was going to get into. I'm always working on 13 past midnight. I've been doing daily uploads and then some over there lately just to keep myself busy and then stay busy on the missing persons channel. Got some other
Yes.
stuff going on, but always happy to come on a show and talk. You know me.
Yeah, I do know you, so I figured it'd be a cool show because typically, if I know who's coming on prior, we kind of, well, we it's always informal, but I have an idea of what I want to do. And today, Steve, you were on 5 weeks ago on Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob in the afternoon. So this will be a first time on this show. This show is newer. It's maybe my 12th show, and we all know you for Missing Persons Mysteries, but a lot of people maybe don't realize that you're quite you've had quite some experiences. You've written several books, you've interviewed many people, and I don't know that I'd call you a researcher. I won't put words in your mouth, but you really come across some strange stuff throughout the course of your career. And I figure tonight would be a great evening to if you'd like to share some of your strange and weirdness you've
Oh,
experienced.
absolutely. And yeah, a researcher would probably be a stretch. Now, I did do some research back in the 80s. I was part of a ghost research group really before there was such a thing. You never heard of it back then, like mid 80s and stuff. And hey, Tiger Lily, just want to say hi to my girlfriend there. She's in the chat. But I'm an experiencer, and I'm a legend tripper. I like to go to these places and just bask in the environment. And some of the places I really enjoy going are the one offs, the Dover Demon and the Flatwoods Monster, or something where they just saw it once. And I never go out expecting anything to happen because that's you're just setting yourself up for failure. Usually,
Yeah.
it always happens when you least expect it.
I find if you're expecting something to happen, it doesn't. And a lot of times these creatures, whether we're talking cryptids or ghosts or the paranormal, usually it does happen, Steve, when you're just going out just to take a stroll, right, in the forest or wherever,
Yeah,
right?
the strangest things I've ever had happen, it was never planned. I didn't go there expecting anything to happen. It just seems to happen, and so it's like there's a lot of things like that. I don't believe in coincidence. I things happen. Believe things happen in their time and for their own purpose and the way they're supposed to happen, and just there you go. And I've lived places where my roommates didn't see or experience anything, and I experienced things. So, what's that all about? I don't know if they were just in denial or if they actually didn't see anything, if it was just me, or.
Well,
But I thought about that years ago. I mean, every house I've ever lived in was haunted to some degree, and I finally came to the conclusion it's not the houses, it's me that's haunted. Stuff follows me around. Stuff just happens, but you can't will it to happen. You just got to let it happen.
I think you do have to let it happen, and really what you just brought up is kind of a good point because I've seen certain things, and I was out in the woods sometime some years ago, and I thought I was seeing something happening out in the woods, and I think it was apparition like, and nobody could see it but me. In fact, even growing up as a kid, me and my brother, I know that I seen ghosts in our bedroom. I know I did today and now for sure. I know after further investigating it, but he could never see it either. So I think it's just meant for some people. Maybe, and as a little kid, as 5 or 6 years old, when I came across certain things, it's not that I was and our minds are open, right? We have no biases, right?
Right.
So for me to see it, not him, it is relatively strange.
Yeah. And again, what is strange? Strange is a relative term, means different things to different people. What's strange to you might not be strange to me or somebody that's grown up in the paranormal. I saw my first full body apparition between 5 or 6 years old. It didn't scare me. It was just like, huh, I wonder what that was all about. What was that? And my grandmother, she was a self-proclaimed gypsy witch. I don't know where the gypsy part came from because she was born in the Cades Cove area of the Smokies, but I'm thinking somewhere back in the lineage there was an old country involved. But and she told fortunes and read tea leaves, coffee grounds, animal entrails, felt bumps on people's head, phrenology, palmistry, cards, you name it. And I asked her about that. She was kind of my mentor, and she said, "Well, there's some things that are meant for you. There's some things that are meant for other people, and some things you just don't know. You may never know, unless in hindsight, if even then, what, if anything, that it meant. You were supposed to see it for whatever reason. And I just took that, to heart and like, okay, it is what it is.
Oh yeah, you're right. Your perception of weird, mine is different. Certainly, other people's out there are different. Now, certainly, doing what I've been doing now for the last couple of years, people in my family think that I'm weird, right? My
Oh
friends
yeah.
think I'm weird. They
I
don't
get
believe,
that all the time.
but I accept that. I embrace that today. Before I was like,
Right.
I was always hush hush about the things I do on the side, right?
Yeah.
And you hate being mysterious, but then again, it's kind of unique.
You don't
It's
want to
kind of
make yourself even more of a target. It was
yeah.
the same like with my family. They were all into hunting and fishing and football. I didn't care anything about that. But if I sat there and started talking about ghosts and cryptids and things like that, and I'm talking about the extended family, I'd get those weird looks. And what do you mean you don't like football? Ghost hunting? Are you serious? So but on my mom's side of the family, they came out of the spiritualism movement from around the turn of the last century. So their normal was seances, table tapping or table tipping, the fortune tellings. They always embrace stuff like that. Now my dad's side not so much, but he said he can remember when he and my mom first got married back in the 40s, going to my grandmother's house and they're having a seance. They walk in, they're all sitting around the table trying to call Uncle Elmer or somebody who disappeared during World War One. So, that their version of strange was a lot different than say what my dad's was. He was a scientist out at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, but yet he believed there were things that just couldn't be explained by science. He'd seen things, particularly in the woods over there. He came from hardcore Appalachia over on the Cumberland Plateau. Lived out in the middle of the woods on a 900-acre farm that butts up against what's now the Big South Fork Recreation Area. And I mean, they didn't even have electricity until he was 6 years old. And even then, a series of batteries that looked like aquariums. I've still got one of the batteries in it. Ran a couple of small light bulbs on the radio. And, that's to come from that and then go to college, went to the University of Tennessee, became a scientist, and then worked out there at the National Laboratory from very humble beginnings. But even he knew that there was stuff, that the science didn't have an answer for everything. And I like that approach. There are things that if you look into it, there is a scientific or rational explanation. And some things there's just not. There used to be a magazine that I read back in the 80s or 90s. I don't know if it's still around or not. It was a scientific journal, but it was called the Journal of Irreproducible Results. And scientists would submit these articles of things, anomalies that they had happened in the laboratory or during some kind of testing that it happened, but they couldn't get it to happen again. They couldn't reproduce that. So how do you explain that? And, that's been 30 years ago now. So, or longer. And you think about that, all these developments and the new nuclear fusion stuff that they've discovered, they're finding out new stuff all the time.
Certainly, science. I do like science. I loved science growing up as a kid. Took it in high school and college and stuff as an elective. But there's some things that about science that I don't think to this day even explain some of the things that go on. And a lot of times they'll foo you. They'll put their nose up to you. But that's what I like about the rawness about having experience, whether it's a ghost, a cryptid, or anything that you can convey that to people. And that's what I like doing on this show. And certainly you are one of the greatest storytellers I've come across in quite some time.
Well, thank you for your kind words. That's a rack on tour. That's just what I do. I like to tell stories. I like to entertain people. Started out doing stand-up comedy, and that's a little harder than what I do now.
Oh,
There's some
geez.
comedian, I can't remember who it is, on his gravestone. It says, "Dying is easy, comedy is hard," and that's the truth. And but I much prefer storytelling, and some of it's from my own experience. Some of my books, "Strange Things in the Woods," a lot of those are stories from family and friends and family and things like that. And I wrote that first. Actually, there was two volumes of that. It's been combined into one by my publisher. And I would go on a radio or TV show or whatever, and invariably the host, if it was a call-in show, the caller would ask, "Well, these are other people's experience. What about you? Have you got any experiences?" And I'd trot out one or two or three, and I got to thinking about that. And I thought there's probably enough there for a book, and there was. That's My Strange World, and that's a sort of a shout out to Frank Edwards, who those books meant everything to me when I was a kid. He had a book called Strange World. So this is My Strange World, my version of his stories and things. So those are some of my personal encounters. I probably got enough since I wrote that one, especially to fill another book.
Well, that's awesome. Why don't we yeah, why don't we get into a little bit of that then? My strange world or your strange world. If you got a couple of things you want to share with us to get started here, because I think and give a little PR out to the book for those of you that haven't purchased it yet.
Yeah, in fact, I've got a copy of it here. I won't read out of it. That's
Oh,
I,
sure.
I hate it when people do that. But
Right.
My Strange World is available on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold, as my publisher likes me to say. And there's Strange Things in the Woods. That's actually two books put together there. But I don't know. I'm just it's hard to pick any one favorite experience. It'd be like picking a favorite child. I've only got one daughter. But if I had a bunch of kids, it would be hard to pick a favorite one. These stories are my children, though, and they become that way. They become more familiar to you over. Sometimes you remember little things, and one in particular, we were talking about how some people experience things, some people see things, some people don't, even at the same time. There was one particular experience that I had where it happened to me and another person, and that, if anything, that gave me clarification or whatever. If it had been a singular experience, it wouldn't have seemed half as interesting. But the fact that it happened to another person. So when I was in high school, I was probably about 15, 16 years old. I lived in a subdivision in West Knox County that was being developed in three phases. Phase one had been there a while. Phase two was where I lived. That was the newer houses. We'd just moved in there that year. And then phase three, they had the paved road that went, about a mile or so up in the back. This is an old farm that was cut up into the subdivision. And all that was up there was a paved road and lots. And the lots still had trees on them and stuff. And a kid up the street that I knew from school, he was a year younger than me, named Danny. We were out riding BMX bicycles in the subdivision. And we'd ridden up to the top of it there because the road went all the way up there and there was nothing up there, no cars, no people, didn't have to worry about anything. And it was in the summertime. It was twilight, starting to get dark. And I'd say about 7 o'clock, maybe 8. And we're just riding along on our bikes. We're going along. And up in the trees in one of these areas that were still wooded, I heard a metallic sound, like a clanking or some kind of noise. I turned to look, and the next thing I remember, I'm still on my bike, still moving, but I'm going the opposite direction. And Danny, who was riding right along beside me, he's there with me. And again, it was mind boggling. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. We just quietly went down the hill. He went into his driveway. I went a block or so down, went into mine. My parents go inside and they're like, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Me and Danny were out riding bicycles." And they're like, "It's late. Tomorrow's a school day. You have any homework or anything?" I didn't, and it was almost 11 o'clock, Rob. And
Yeah.
so somewhere in there, we lost about 3 hours. And I didn't mention it for a day or two. And I went up to his house, and he was still reeling from it. He's just kind of sitting there, and I'm like, "What happened the other night?" And he said, "I don't know." And he'd experienced the same thing I had. We were riding along. He heard the noise too.
Hmm.
And then the next thing we both knew, we're still on our bikes, but headed in the other direction. And 3 hours or so had passed.
Wow.
No idea what went on in that time. I don't know if I want to know.
Yeah.
I've It was the same experience. I mean, his experience was exactly like mine, and it shook him to the point that he didn't even want to talk about it, and I experienced it with him. But I've had people ask me, "Would you consider, going under hypnotic regression or something and seeing what happened.
Mm.
Part of me would like to, and part of me's afraid to. I don't want to know if I got probed or something, if it was aliens.
Yeah, yeah, I was about to say, Steve, a lot of times you hear, with the several people I've spoken with over time and doing my own research with certain individuals, a lot of times, a lot of people attribute missing time to perhaps an alien abduction. Not suggesting this happened to you, but if you want to further explore that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's really the only time that I've had significant missing time. I've had some other what I consider little time slips where I've had just a few minutes of missing time. One time when I lived in Oregon, I was walking home from the store, which is like a block from my house, a block and a half maybe. I'm just walking along, and I turn into what I think is my street. And somehow I'd gone like 3 blocks beyond my street. I turned into my street, and I'm like, nothing looked familiar. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I was just walking. I wasn't, looking at my phone. I wasn't really paying attention to anything. I was just walking. And suddenly I was about 3 blocks away and had no knowledge of walking that far. I turned around and walked back. And it was all very confusing. But again, was that just, was I in some kind of mental fog? Who can say? But I've had some little things like that. Another time in Oregon, and I think I saw somebody else that was having a time slip. I was downtown and in the heart of the city there, and probably I think it was on Second Avenue. I've been to a record store down there, an actual vinyl record store. They still exist. They had used records too. And I'd come out of the record store and I went up a block, and as I turned the corner, there was a guy coming around the other corner, and he was dressed like I can only say in 1800s clothes. He had on this old-fashioned looking suit and some kind of strange looking hat. And he looked at me like he was absolutely horrified. Of course, I'm wearing like a Susie and the Banshees t-shirt and ripped up jeans and a flannel and stuff. Looked the part for going to a record store. And this guy was just like side-eyeing me like I was the devil. And I thought, wow, what's that guy dressed up for? I said, is there some kind of cosplay? I thought it was, maybe some kind of steampunk thing or something. I got to get a better look at this guy's getup. I just turned the corner. I wheeled around, went back around the corner. There's no guy there. That whole side of the street was taken up by a building. There were windows up high, but there were no doorways for the whole block. There was traffic whizzing by. He wasn't across the street. He wasn't down the street. He didn't pass me going back around the corner to get a better look at me. What was that? And then just the reaction on his face, I think he slipped forward and saw me and was just, what kind of strange person is this? Because to somebody Victorian time, I look about like this, like, what is that? What's wrong with that guy? He looks like a lunatic. And yet he stood out like a sore thumb because, very elegantly dressed, like with a top coat. And it wasn't quite a top hat. It wasn't quite a bowler, but it was some kind of a hat that you wore back then because you didn't go out. You weren't dressed if you didn't have a hat on, if you were a gentleman of society and of breeding. So again, and Portland has that history. It goes back. There was it was a rough and tumble town in the 1800s. A lot of saloons, a lot of brothels, like a lot of murders. They have the Shanghai tunnels there downtown, and that's exactly what it sounds like. People got shanghaied. You go into a bar or brothel, they slip something in your drink, then you go down a trap door into this tunnel. And I've taken the tour of the tunnels. Part of it still exists, and it's open. And it's like a really fine sand down there on the floor. And it's some of the places are full of broken glass. So before they threw you down there, they'd take your shoes. So if you wake up before you're on a ship to China or wherever, you're barefoot, you're still groggy and disoriented from whatever they slipped you. You're barefoot, and the ground's covered with glass. So you weren't going anywhere. But that was a real thing. People got shanghaied and found themselves on a merchant ship, and you had to work your passage back if you didn't have money to buy your way back. And of course, they rolled you anyway before they emptied your pockets before they threw you down there. So Portland was a rough place back in the wild days, back in the early days, 1800s.
Yeah, and what I find interesting too, and I don't think this is coincidence either, like some of the couple accounts that you've just brought up, it always seems like I had an account a bar that I owned was owned back in Prohibition. Well, I've seen ghosts that look like they were from Prohibition. Some of the accounts that you've spoken about was from a different time period. That's amazing to me that, and a lot of people you speak with when they have these stories or encounters, it's always from a different time period. It begs the question to me, there really are a lot of souls that have not been brought over. They're lingering from all
I think
different
so.
centuries, are they not?
And something about Civil War battlefields seem to be the worst. Now, I've traveled around the world a couple of times. I've been to Vietnam. I've been to the South Pacific. I've been to Germany and France, and seen some of those World War One and World War Two battlefields. Been to Laos and Cambodia. I mean, the killing fields, the Khmer Rouge, all that was just right there. But there's just, I mean, those battlefields are eerie and you can feel a presence there. But there's just something about the Civil War battlefields that, and I think it was probably because it was literally brother against brother. I had people on both sides in the war, and it was the first time that Americans killed other Americans on American soil. And
Hmm.
I think, and there were just so many horrible, horrific battles. My brother was a big Civil War aficionado, and he showed me this photograph one time. It was some people sitting on a bluff overlooking a battlefield, and there's some Union soldiers squared off over here and some Confederate soldiers over here. And there's these people up there having a picnic. It's a man, woman, some kids. They've got a blanket spread out. You can see the stuff there. They're dressed nice. I mean, people wore nice clothes to even go on a picnic back in the day. And then in the next frame, the picnic stuff is just scattered everywhere. The people, the spectators are gone. You can see down on the battlefield, it's full of dead and dying. I don't know what they expected. Did they think they were going to like watch a football game or a sporting event or something? Did they think it was going to be like fisticuffs? But no, it was blood and cannonballs and gunshots, and they got out of there. So there's something about the Civil War battlefields in particular. I mean, Gettysburg, all the stuff that goes on there, Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia. I've seen and experienced some weird stuff there. Snodgrass Hill, uh, and then some of the lesser battlefields. And then there's even places where there were just a lot of smaller skirmishes that weren't, the big well-known battles. There was a lot of bloodshed, and I believe that the blood cries out from the ground. Those people, those are restless souls. Martha Washington Inn in Abingdon, Virginia, that was used as a field hospital during the Civil War. And during the wintertime, they stacked the bodies in the basement till the ground thawed out in the spring so they could bury them. That place is very actively haunted. They've seen all kinds of stuff there. I've had a couple of weird experiences there. Talked to an elderly porter that had worked there. He's probably passed away now because it's been probably 20, 30 years since I've talked to him. But he had all kind. He started there as a young man and was probably in his 60s, maybe 70 when I talked to him. Just a wealth of stories, and that's one thing I encourage people to do if you like doing research, if you like telling and retelling stories, if you want to be a storyteller, you got to go to the people that's got the stories. And older people, senior citizens, that's one of our greatest overlooked natural resources. If I go into a little town or little community, that's the two places I'll look for. I'll look for a senior citizen center or a bingo hall or somewhere where the older people gather because they've got the stories. And then the other opposite end of the spectrum is the kids, the
Yeah.
teenagers. They know where all the haunted places are, the Crybaby Bridge or the haunted house in the neighborhood and stuff. So it's great. I love going into places, and I specifically mentioned Crybaby Bridge. Just about every little town community's got at least one of those, I think. And I could do a whole book just on the Crybaby Bridges that I've been to. For those of you that don't know, that's a story about that varies from location to location. Woman, for whatever reason, went crazy and threw her baby in the water. And it dates back. I think the earliest version I've ever heard is La Llorona from Mexico, where the lady drowned her kids and then she wanders the earth for all eternity trying to get them back. Crybaby Bridge is the same thing. Woman threw the baby off the bridge, and you see her specter on the bridge crying for the baby, looking into the water for the baby, or the obverse of that. Sometimes you hear the baby crying down in the water, or people see specter down in the water. Supposedly, there's a really famous one in New Jersey on I can't remember the name of the road up there. It's not Shades of Death Road, but one of the other ones where they have a lot of encounters. And supposedly, if you throw coins in the water, then at midnight something will throw them back. And just I love stuff like that, man. As Patton said about war, God help me, but I love it. So I love the paranormal. I love the supernatural. I love going where this stuff has happened, even if I don't experience things, just to be there and bask in the ambiance, if you will. This is where that happened.
Yeah, and I agree with you too. And a lot of times, are you one of those individuals there? If you'll go to, let's say you visit a haunted house, or maybe that you're in Gettysburg, right, or Gatlinburg, and are you one of these people that can feel something different going on, or is it just casual, another day at the shop?
A lot of it just depends on the place. There's places that it's more strong than others. There's a palpable feel. I remember once I was up in Washington State with a friend of mine. We'd gone up into the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, uh, sort of looking for Bigfoot. The only
Hmm.
thing we found was maybe a track in the snow. We'd gotten up to where the snow line was, and this was like in, I think, April. So there was still some snow up in the mountains, and we saw what looked like one bare human footprint, big size,
Hmm.
but it was like Bigfoot put his foot and like, oh, that's cold. I'm not going to go that way. And that was it. It was just a singular footprint. But coming back from there, we drove into this little community. And as soon as we crossed into it, I had this weird, almost like a deja vu type feeling, but it wasn't because I'd never been there. And I told the girl that was driving her Jeep, I said, there's something off about this place. This doesn't feel right. This feels weird. We drove around. There was an old railroad depot there and a restaurant and a couple of old houses and some old buildings and stuff, some of them abandoned. And I couldn't get a cell phone signal with the carrier I was with at that time. But I said, I want to come back here sometime. The name of the place was Yakult, Yacolt, Yakult, Washington. Sure enough, when we got back to civilization, no offense to people in Yakult, but your service up there's not any good, at least not with AT&T or whoever I was with at the time. But I looked it up, and sure enough, Yakult is an Indian word. And depending on the tribe, now there was a couple different tribes in there, and I can't remember which they are, but one tribe that meant haunted valley, and another tribe that meant valley of the fire demon. Well, there was a thing that happened. It was called the Yakult Burn, and it was a natural forest fire. I mean, they don't think it was arson or anything. One of those that just happened. It could be a lightning strike or whatever. But it was at that time, it was one of the biggest forest fires in Washington State. I mean, a freak forest fire in the Valley of the Fire Demon. How strange is that? But the more I delved into that little town, I found some people on Facebook that lived there, got their stories. One lady told me about that when she walked home from school, she would cut through a field and she would have what she described as tiny Indian braves with bows and arrow, about 3 feet tall, chase her home. There's a spook light that they've seen there along the railroad. And I went back to the restaurant and was going to talk to the lady there that owned the place. And I'd ordered some food, and it was just her and one other guy working. So she's back there cooking my food. I went back to wash my hands in the bathroom. I went in, did my business, washed my hands. And as I started back out, and I don't know why I did this because I never do it, but as I reached for the doorknob, I just turned the light off. Normally, I'll open the door and then click the light off. But I clicked the light off as I took hold of the doorknob. Well, the door wouldn't open. It was like somebody was holding the door. And I shook it a couple times, rattled it. I tried twisting the knob, and I heard some kids laughing. And I thought, oh, okay, there's some kids holding the door. Well, that time I gave it a big yank. Didn't see any kids. Didn't see anybody out there. I went back and sat down. Well, shortly the lady brought her food out to the table, and she'd already introduced herself as the owner and proprietor. And I said, yes, was that your kids that was holding the door on me when I was in the bathroom? And she looks at me and she said, no. She said, this place is haunted. She said, there are children here. And I hear them running up and down the back stairs at night, laughing and making a commotion and stuff. And then there's a further legend that whatever tribe occupied that area before the white settlers, uh, there was a whole generation of children that went missing. They went out to go berry picking. Now, for those of you that follow me on missing persons and mysteries, a lot of people go missing in or near berry patches or something. Berries has something to do with it. Well, this tribe that was living in this area, this group of this tribe, they sent their kids to go pick berries and they never came back. Almost like a Pied Piper type thing. Something caught the kids. So there are, I think it's, trying to remember the data that I read, it's probably 40 or 50 kids, a whole generation of kids that just went missing that were never found. Now, there could be a rational explanation. Did another tribe capture them? Did they fall in the river? Did they get lost in the woods, or what happened to them? I mean, it's pretty strange for that many to go missing en masse while picking berries and no sign of them was ever found. But again, like to get back, that's a roundabout way of getting there. But the answer to your question, yes, some places you can just feel that. I knew that place was off. It was a feel. I mean, it was like driving into it. I just thought there's something weird here. This place does not feel right. And I was right. The whole place was off. I knew nothing about it, never read about it, and took some due diligence and research to find out all that I did. And there's been a lot of Bigfoot sightings and stuff there, ghosts, a little bit of everything. The tiny uh, Fey-sized Indian braves, whatever they are, Native Americans.
You This is all fascinating stuff. I love really talking about the paranormal and ancient history, or not ancient, but the history of these great stories. And you mentioned like Bigfoot. Throughout your time doing over the years, have you come across anybody came to you, or maybe perhaps yourself, Steve? I don't know if about your all of your experiences. Obviously, you got so many. What's the thing about Bigfoot? Have you had come across a person, perhaps while writing a book with us today, Steve? I saw something in the woods, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. And it doesn't have to be Bigfoot. It could be Mothman, Dogman, Goat Man. Any cool stories you've come across over the years?
Oh, all kinds of things in the woods, and yeah, there have been people that have described what they believe to be a Bigfoot, some kind of tall, hairy creature. You wrote some stories for me that are going to be on my Bandcamp page and on 13. And there was a guy in there talking about, I think he was deer hunting and he was watching a stump, and then the stump suddenly like stood up and turned into this creature and walked away. I've heard some stories similar to that where I've heard of rocks. People thought it was something was a rock, and then it turned out it was some kind of creature. It sort of morphed into this hairy thing, stood up and walked off. What is that? And then there's just it goes on and on and on, and that's the thing about this. A lot of people have had these experiences, and the internet has made the world a smaller place. And I think it's also emboldened a lot of people. If you're home and you're sitting behind your keyboard, you're more likely to tell something that happened to you that otherwise you might have thought people would consider you crazy, or that you were drug addled or a lunatic or something. And that's something we're finding more and more with missing persons and mysteries. I ran an interview today I did with a lady that when she was a little girl, her and her babysitter went for a walk in the woods. They came across and again, a berry field. They were going to go pick berries, and little girl had her mother had given her a bread bag to go pick berries in, and they got lost in the woods. The trail was they were on just suddenly wasn't there. They stumbled out of like some brush, and there was a dirt road there, like a rutted road, like with wagon ruts on it, like the two ruts and the grass growing up in the middle. There was a house up on a little rise there. She said it looked like something out of a little house on the prairie. And there was an old fashioned wooden bucket sitting in the middle of the road, like, oh, you want to pick berries? Here's your bucket. Go pick berries. And the place that they'd wandered into where this was, it doesn't exist. I've looked at the woods that she described on a map. I know the location. You couldn't go more than a quarter or a half mile in any direction. You'd either come to the highway, to the river, to a cornfield. You'd be in somebody's backyard. But they were in there for hours. And she went back and looked as an adult. That place doesn't exist. There was no place in the house. There was no rutted road. And at the time, she was a child, but she was a big fan of Little House on the Prairie. So it's almost like whatever was creating this illusion or reality or dimension that they'd walked into, it knew what would appeal to her. And she was like, she wanted to grab the bucket and go pick berries and go see if there was anybody in the house. And the babysitter's like hanging on to her, like, no, 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 we can't do this. And she said it was daylight there. It was beautiful. And they'd gone into the woods in the evening, close to supper time. and wandered around in there. She said she didn't think they could have been gone more than a half hour or so. But when they came back out of the woods, it was full dark, and her mother was worried because they'd been gone so long. So went into the woods in the dusk, came into a place still in the woods where it was daylight and there's an old farmhouse, and she said it was deadly quiet, no birds, no animals, no sounds at all, no sign of any life, just a little house and a bucket sitting on this wagon road, and it doesn't exist. Where'd they go? What happened? Fascinating. And then I've got another story that I've still got to edit, another interview that I did, a lady that lived on a several hundred-acre farm with her parents in Missouri, that her and her dog had some kind of strange experience, time loss. They were actually kind of frozen, and just it goes on and on. There's something about the woods, and particularly the deep woods. Now I've hiked all over the Smokies. I've done a lot of hiking on the Appalachian Trail. I've been on it in every state it goes through except for Maine. I've never through hiked it. I'm probably too old for that now. I think that, and then I'll read about somebody that for their 70th birthday or their 80th birthday or something, they're going to through hike the Appalachian Trail. But I've spent a couple months on it before I hike from, depending on which direction you're going, where it starts or the terminus in Georgia up into Virginia. I got out off the trail at Damascus, Virginia, and I took a couple months doing it. But, I was camping. I'd get off in some little town. I even stayed in a hotel a couple nights. I didn't stay on the trail, didn't camp the whole time. I'd go into, if there's a little town right off the trail, I'd go somewhere else. But there's something about those deep woods, and you get out there, there's a strangeness in the woods. Sometimes you see things, sometimes it manifests itself, sometimes it doesn't. But particularly when you're in the deep, deep woods, where maybe and I'm not one to usually follow the trail. I like to do my own thing. If I've got old school, I used a compass, an orienteering compass, and then I had a Garmin GPS, one of the earlier ones. And now I'd be hesitant to go in there without a personal locator beacon or something with a little more oomph to it. But I've gone off trail before, and you get that feeling that you're in a place where maybe no one has set foot here in hundreds of years, if at all. And the forest, like, it lets you know how small and infinitesimal you are in the grand scheme of things when you look up at these old trees. Another unusual experience, I'd been up in the Smokies. I went up to Klingman's Dome. There's an observation tower. That's the highest point in the Smokies. And again, I wasn't taken to the trail. It's usually crowded with tourists and people going up to see what you can see, which is usually not much, because the Smoky Mountains, they earned that sobriquet because there's like a fog that rolls in. And a lot of times, if you're up at an elevation, you're up above that and you can't see anything down below you. It looks like clouds or smoke. That's why the natives call that the Smokies. But I'd been up to Klingman's Dome, and it was in the late afternoon. I was just doing my own thing. I did go up the observation tower, couldn't see anything that day. Went back down, and instead of taking the marked trail, I just took off through the woods. I didn't have a GPS at that time. I just had a compass. I knew basically what direction I needed to go. So I'm going down the hill, and Rob, I come to this place where there's a clearing, and there's just the most magnificent tree I've ever seen. And this type of tree doesn't grow above that elevation.
Wow.
And there was shafts of sunlight coming through the clouds, and it's hitting this tree. Huge, huge tree. I mean, centuries old. It'd take several people holding hands to go all the way around the thing. It's in a clearing. Shaft of sunlight's coming through the clouds suddenly. It looked like something out of a Disney movie. I was waiting for the angels to sing or something, And I walked up, and I'm looking around this tree, and I walked around it, and something like got into my head, and it said, look how comfortable that looks. Wouldn't that be a good place to just sit down and rest and lean up against that tree and just reflect on the grandeur and the beauty here? And if you're tired, you've been hiking, you can even take a nap here. You could lay down and just take a snooze.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'd want to take a snooze.
I would have been like Rip Van Winkle, because suddenly I thought, where'd that thought even come from? It's late in the afternoon. it was probably around 3 or 4. It's going to be dark up there soon, and I'm off in the woods. I'm not even following a trail. Like I need to get down off this mountain, or I don't know what's going to happen to me. But it was one of those times when it went quiet, and you hear people talk about that lots and lots of times before something strange happens, or they have a Bigfoot sighting or encounter some sort of cryptid. It went. I mean, it was like somebody hit the mute button. I couldn't hear the wind in the trees. I couldn't hear water or cars, or of course there might not have been anything out that far anyway. But it was like a deafening silence, and something tried to lull me to sleep, trying to tell me, "Oh, this is good. Just sit down, take a rest. You know, you're tired. You'll take a nap. You can get back up and be on your way." But I honestly believe that if I'd listened to whatever that was and laid down and took a nap, or maybe even tarried there a little too long, I would have been among the missing. They'd be looking for Steve Stockton in the Great Smoky Mountains.
Well, you know what? Maybe. And when you brought that big tree, I'm thinking, yeah, they'd be a nice place to take a nap, take a snooze. And I think my adrenaline one would keep me going. And what I know today, I probably wouldn't fall asleep because I don't know if I'd want to be a member of the 411, right? And first,
Exactly.
I want to thank everybody for joining me and Steve tonight, Bigfoot Mission Rob's channel, also on Texas Front Porch channel tonight. Thank you. And Steve, you know, you made mention of something that I've come across quite often. And in fact, it's kind of what I tell people sometimes when they're out. Now, this is for like people that want to go experience something. I've often found, and from what people have told me, and you mentioned the point, on trail, you know, certainly on trail, people have come across things, whether it's a cryptid or something supernatural. I get that. But really, what you had mentioned, that's where it's at. You've got to really go deep into those woods where it's really raw, where, you know, you got to maybe take a machete to hack through
Oh yeah, yeah. There's
because
places like that.
there's elements out there that are
Oh,
there for a reason.
yeah, there's a place in the Smokies that a lot of the park rangers will even deny it exists or won't tell you where it's at because it's just so rugged, and it's called Huggins Hell, and that's like a mountain term. The hells are those places that are like that are so overgrown that you need a machete or something to get through there. But this one, I mean, there's places where you got to climb up, and there's waterfalls coming down, and there's brush, and like I said, a lot of times you can look it up, you can Google it and find some information about it. But park rangers generally just won't tell people, "Oh, well, you don't want to go there," or "Well, I'm not sure," something like that, because they know that unless you're technically experienced with hiking and climbing and that sort of thing, it's not going to be a good experience for you. And then I've had other people talk about supposedly there's feral people in the Smokies, and depending on who you hear tell the story, there's a guy here on YouTube called South Force 10. He claims they're like some sort of Bigfoot human hybrid, and that they were in there long before the park was there, and that's part of the reason the area where the park is was chosen to help contain these people. And he's an older gentleman, and he's old if I'm calling him an older gentleman, but he said that I'll be 60 this year, but he claims that his relatives back in the 30s, prior to the national park, I think it went in, I want to say 34, 36. Franklin Roosevelt came there and dedicated the park. It was a big deal. But he says that before it became a park, that his relatives, and he lives in Sevierville or Sevier County, just there in the edge of the Smokies. And he claims that the government hired his relatives to go in there and kill these things and thin them out. And according to him, that's what took Dennis Martin. And they either took him for breeding purposes or they ate him. He said, "Yeah, they will eat people." And and then we've talked about that on the other channel. That are there feral cannibal hillbillies in the woods? Anything's a possibility. And then people will say, "Well, there's no way people could hide in those woods to where somebody couldn't find them." You might want to rethink that. You just haven't been deep enough in the woods yet. Dwight McCarter, he's was the park ranger in the Smokies. He was the lead tracker on the Dennis Martin case. He's long since retired, but he talked about people that lived in the woods, and he never really said that it was Bigfoot, but he did talk about them appearing that they had like furs or something that they wore. I think he was, if you knew how to read between the lines, he was saying, yeah, there's hairy creatures that live there. But he, the Smokies are that vast. If you remember Eric Rudolph, the
Yeah.
abortion clinic bomber, when
Mm.
he was at the top of the FBI's most wanted list, he went out and hid in Nantahala National Forest, which isn't anywhere near as big or as dense as the forest as the Smokies. I mean, and he was in there for over 5 years. He had little camps set up. The only way they finally caught him, he got a little brave and was sneaking into some little town in North Carolina and raiding the dumpster outside this convenience store for day-old bread and snack cakes, and a rookie deputy recognized him. But and this was a person that had no outdoor experience, no camping or hiking, survival experience or anything, but he's just like, I don't want to go to prison, so I'm going to go hide in the woods. He hunted, he fished, he raided the campsites. He had stuff stashed everywhere. If that guy can do it, imagine somebody that their family, feral or not, have lived in those woods for generations. You know, second, third, fourth generation. They don't want anything to do with people. If they know how to hunt, how to fish, how to build shelter, everything you need's out there. There's water, there's game. You just have to know what to do with it. And I truly believe that if you're hell-bent, you could hide in any good-sized forest, national forest or national park, and not be found if you stayed out of the touristy areas. I mean, you know, some of those places cover millions of acres, and there's all kinds of hidey holes. And again, stealth, if you knew camouflage, just the basic stuff. So I don't believe that you couldn't get in the woods in places where somebody couldn't find you. I mean, it happens all the time.
Steve, really quickly, we're coming up on a break. We got to say goodbye to our listeners on the radio side. To come back, we're going to take a 5-minute break and continue with Steve Stockton. Thanks for the super chats from Paul and from Mike. And Steve, before we go, let everyone know about where they can find you on the radio side.
I'm not on the terrestrial radio that much. I know.
No, I know you're not, for our radio listening audience. So they got to go.
Where they can find me, I'm on Missing Persons and Mysteries. That's the big channel over on YouTube. Got 250,000 subscribers. 13 Past Midnight. That's one of my my other channel, my paranormal channel. Find me there. My books, like I said, Amazon.com and wherever fine books are sold, they're listed in books in print. Any bookstore or library can get them for you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Stephen. Once again, to everybody on the radio side, come back to subscribe to Bigfoot, Michigan Rob, and Texas Porch, Front to Porch, to pick up the rest of the show. It's going to be a great one. We'll be back in 5 minutes with Steve Stockton.
Four minutes to go, folks. 4 minutes. Three minutes. We're almost there. 2-minute warning, guys. 2-minute warning. One minute. 1 minute.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond BMR with Steve Stockton. Thank you to Paul for the super chat. And thank you. I had another one out there. I got to scroll down and find it. Awesome super chat out there. Bear with me. I should write this stuff down, you know. Should write it down. While I'm looking, Mondays is Texas Front Porch. That comes on at 7:30 in the East. Tuesdays, we've got Van Buren Variety at 8 o'clock in the East. 9 o'clock right back here beyond BMR. 9 in the East. 10 in the East, Jason does something called Untold Mysteries on AM radio. And then, of course, on Wednesdays, Jason McLean Questions Everything. That comes on at 10 o'clock in the East. Thursdays, Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. That is at 1 in the East. The Blondes and the Booze, Thursdays, 9 in the East. Blondes and Booze again, Fridays, the Blondes, the Booze, and the Woo. That's Fridays at 9 in the East. And, of course, Jessica Jones on Spaced Out Radio. Go check her out on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. We got a great show going. Thank you once again for the lovely super chats. And we're going to bring Steve back up here in a minute once he gets settled in. I do appreciate it. Subscribe to Bigfoot Michigan Rob on YouTube, Texas Front Porch on YouTube. Don't forget, 13 past midnight, Steve Stockton, and of course, Missing Persons and Mysteries over there. Fantastic show. I suggest that everybody go ahead and check that out. Awesome show. And the Blondes Booze podcast, go check them out. I'm going to wait for Steve. I'm going to run through the chat. Radio Vault, thanks for joining. Chiro, Duke Sullivan, World Bigfoot Radio. Go subscribe to Duke on World Bigfoot Radio if not already. Christine Murphy, Lori Barnes, Glenn, Pat Murphy, Joe Monk. Hey, Joe. Good to see you. Maggie M, Susie B. Who else? A whole host of others in here. Lily Pond, Be Kind.
Sorry
Tiger
about that.
Lily.
Had to take
That's
my
okay.
little dog out, and he can't tell time. I bought him a watch, and he won't wear it. So,
You know, I was just going through chat here and doing my little beginning of the show, second half spiel for everybody. Hey, Lisa Smith, how you doing? So, where do we end off? Yeah, we were talking, about all these stories you've come across, and it goes without saying, Steve. With Missing Persons Mysteries, you got to maybe touch on that. A lot of great experiences you've given us thus far. And I want to ask you, I think that everything comes together, right? I know after I've been doing some writing for you on a couple other things you got going on and doing some research to me, and even prior to meeting you, I think all these things come together. It's not one particular thing out there when we talk about the missing. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that. It's not just one thing, is it?
It's all kinds of things, and the missing people in particular. Is it predator animals? Is it serial killers? Is it aliens? Is it Bigfoot? Is it portals? Is it time slips? Is it any one of a number of things? Yes, it's not any particular one of those, but I think it's all those. And you have to look at it at a case by case basis, and it's just there's so many missing. It's just amazing. Like just in one of our series, a National Park Mysteries series, we just finished volume 28, just released volume 28. There's 10 missing person cases in each one of those. That's 280 people right there just in that one series. I mean, we've covered so many more. And that's literally the tip of the iceberg. We have only scratched the surface. Where do they go? Now some people are found either alive or deceased. Sometimes it's something as simple as being ill-prepared or overestimating your own abilities. Hypothermia is a real thing. Heat stroke if it's in the summertime. And there are, unfortunately, people that go into the woods to opt out of life. But even then, how could you get yourself in an area where nobody could ever find you? There are people that have gone in, sorry, my dog's chiming in there, with that mission in mind, yet they never find them. And a lot of times, they park at the trailhead, they see them walk into the park, and then they never come back out. You can't get that far. But then we also cover stuff like one of my favorite stories of 2022, a little boy named Riker Webb. I think he was 3 years old, I want to say. And he just wandered away from his house in his little footy pajamas. They found him 2 miles away in the woodshed of a cabin, sitting in a lawnmower bag, talking to himself. And when they brought him out, the kid looked shell-shocked. His eyes are big. And some of the comments we got on that, like, that's not the same kid, or he looks like he's got PTSD, or somebody even commented that's a changeling. Take that and put it back and go get the other kid. But they had him on the gurney there, the search and rescue people. His feet aren't even that dirty. And this was during rain, mud, snow. There was all kinds of stuff going on. There's no way that little kid walked that far. And plus it was like up a mountain and down another side of a mountain to get to where he was. It's indescribable, some of these circumstances. Now, whether he'll remember anything when he grows up, it remains to be seen. Might be like the robot granny kid that went missing on Mount Shasta. That's one of my favorite stories, where the little kid went missing and came into contact with what he thought looked like his grandma, but then it turned out he says it was a robot, and she took him to a cave where there was like weapons and backpacks and things covered in dust and cobwebs, and what he described as people that almost appeared to be in a state of suspended animation. She tried to get him to defecate on a piece of paper. He wouldn't do it. So she took him back and put him on the trail and said, wait here, somebody will find you. And sure enough, they found him. And he didn't really talk about it much then, but a few weeks later, he was talking to his grandma, and he said, I don't like the other grandma. And she thought he meant his maternal grandmother. And she said, what's wrong with grandma so-and-so? And he said, no, I don't mean that grandma. He said, I mean the grandma that looks like you that I met in the woods. And she's like, what? And he said, remember when I went missing and you couldn't find me? He said, there was a woman that looked like you, but she was a robot. And the lady called her son and said, what are you telling this kid? What are you letting him watch? And her son was like, he was telling us that story the other night. We don't know where he got that. But then the grandma, the one that he saw the robot supposedly of, she had gone camping on Mount Shasta about a year prior and had a strange experience. She heard some kind of noise, looked out of her tent. She saw red eyes. Now, how many of your stories have creatures with red eyes in them? Barton Nunley, I've done some of his stories. A lot of these things have red eyes. That's a hint and a half for you right there. If you see red eyes, go the other way.
Yes.
But she looked out of her tent. All she remembered was seeing something with red eyes. And then when she woke up, She was face down outside of her tent in the dirt, and later found what appeared to be 2 puncture wounds in the back of her neck. So did something take DNA or whatever out of her and make this clone, this replica of her that lives in a cave on Mount Shasta? It's just, it boggles the mind.
That Mount Shasta, I did a story. I'm not going to tell that story. It was Mount Shasta because I started reading a lot on Mount Shasta with different weird experiences. I did one on the channel that is really weird and out there. You guys have to check it out. And it was about a Bigfoot with red eyes, and it seemingly was watching this guy for many, many years when it finally made an appearance. But then and he saw this thing for one time, then it disappeared, never to be seen again by this gentleman. But I was also getting back to like the missing people. There was another one. And again, I find a lot of these too, since I have watched your missing persons for a couple of years now. You always find about the folding of clothes. Now, I did a story. I'm not going to elaborate on that again on the channel, where there was a group of 10 people. There was three of them were trackers, and I think this was in Western Pennsylvania, one of their national parks out there. So these folks, decided to go once again off trail, and they're cutting through brush. They're getting deep into the woods. Then they come up on a little path where a bunch of animals. It was a pathway that was dredged out by traffic from animals running through. Then now there's 10 of these people. You have to remember, some were abreast walking and some were single file. Now, all of a sudden, something jumps in the pathway. A lot of people described it as an oversized hominid. It looked like it had a wolf-sized head, stares at him with red eyes, disappears. Okay, fine and dandy. Now the people, they're terrified. They don't know what they're looking at. Even the trackers have never seen anything. But now when they huddle together to turn around and go back to camp, they count off each individual, excuse me. As I made mention, there was 10. Now there was 9. Okay. Now, and so they went back to camp. They're yelling in the woods for this person, right? Yelling out his name. No response. They're petrified. They finally make it to camp. The leaders of the research team, now they get a hold of the proper authorities to start looking for this person. Goes through the night into the morning. Long story short, this person's never found. However, within the first 24 hours, Steve, of right where this apparition, cryptid, whatever you want to call it, entity appeared, about 90 feet, 90 yards away on a rock down by a river stream or a stream, there was neatly packed, folded clothing there. Now they look at this package of clothing, they open it up, and a couple of the people recognize that was the clothes of the person that was in their party. I immediately think, wow. Now I'm thinking really out there, Steve, was this guy a shapeshifter? Did he turn into a werewolf? Somehow, some really weird stuff. But again, national park, person disappears. And so the reason I bring that up, we always find there's always clothes involved, it seems, in a lot of these stories.
Yeah, there was one case we covered where they said it literally looked like the guy had sat down on the log and melted out of his clothes. And in the Strange Things in the Woods, excuse me, I got to take a drink here.
Mm-hmm.
I have a story that came from a girl that I worked with, her and a friend. Excuse me. Well, that worked well. The coffee went down the wrong way. But her and a friend were hiking in just a little state park in Tennessee, and they came across what they described as a primitive campsite. I mean, there was a tent and evidence that people had been there, and but it looked like it'd been there a while. And then just a little way from that campsite, they found what they described as 2 sets of clothing, one male and one female. Like the man, he was wearing a windbreaker with a shirt. The shirt was still tucked in the pants. There was still a belt. The pants went down. There was socks. Socks went into the shoes. The woman's same thing. I think she was wearing a skirt, a sweater. But the stockings, the shoes, everything was still there. And she said it literally looked like they had laid down on the ground, held hands, and just disappeared and left their clothing behind. And yeah, there is stories of it being folded, of it hanging in trees. Now there is the paradoxical undressing that's one of the side effects of hypothermia. You're getting so cold you're actually freezing to death, and the core of the body is giving off as much heat as it can to try to warm you up, and you feel like you're burning up when you're literally freezing to death. But that story, that one's always mystified me. It scared these two girls to death. They didn't tell anybody about it for years, but they watched the paper to see if there was anybody missing or if there was any bodies found or anything. Never heard anything about it, and they never went back. The other girl got really upset, like, we need to leave. We need to get out of here now. What was that? Were those people interdimensional travelers and it was time for them to go back? Did something take them? Who's to say? I mean, there's so many different ways that you can look at that. And yeah, clothing is involved. And sometimes the places that people are found in will be a place that's been searched many times over. It's like whatever took them to begin with, days or weeks before, is taunting the search crews, the search and rescue people. And there was one case I read about. It was in New England. I think is I can't remember if it's Bennington Triangle or one of those places up there. There's a couple of different triangles in New England. But they found a guy in Boulder Fields. Boulder Fields play into these missing cases too. A lot of times people will be found in or near a boulder field. And if deceased, they look like they've been dropped from a great height when there is no height for them to have fallen from or been dropped from or pushed from. But in New England, I think it's the Algonquin tribe, they have a legend of a creature that can disguise itself as a rock. And so what better place for something that can look like a rock to hide than in a boulder field? Somebody happens along, the thing opens up, swallows them, does whatever it does, I guess, to get the whatever it needs out of your body, your life essence or whatever, and then spits you back out. Well, if you think about that, if something that was a rock creature swallowed you, took whatever it needed, spit you back out in the boulder field where it was hiding, you might look like you'd fallen from a great height because you've been crushed in this rock. There's other stories in New England like that of another guy that went missing. They found him just in the woods, an experienced hunter. And that's often people that go missing are people that are experienced in the woods, people that know their way around. They found him in a clearing, and he looked like he'd been crushed to death. But by what? I mean, there was speculations that it was some kind of Bigfoot type creature because they have been seen in the area. Same area, there was a stagecoach got stuck, and the driver was out trying to get the coach out of the mud. This big, hairy, 8-foot tall creature comes out of the woods, peeks into the stagecoach, sees the people in there, and then basically screamed at them, turned the stagecoach over, and ran off back into the woods.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. I remember that story, Steve.
I think that was Bennington Triangle.
Yeah, it is. It is. I've got a little thing on that.
Literally, what the devil? I mean, what was that? And scream at him and turn the stagecoach over. That it was.
That's something else. That's coming soon to a channel near you. Hey, Steve, you mentioned about the hypothermia, and a lot of people, get so hot you take off your clothes. Now, I've done several interviews with people about the DLF pass. Now, I know that you've probably done that on Missing Persons Mysteries, and I've heard so many different takes. If you can recollect that one, what's your take on that one?
That's a strange one. Now, there are people that try to debunk it and say, oh, it was an avalanche. And, well, an avalanche doesn't rip your tongue out. I mean, I could understand if you were caught in an avalanche because these people cut their way out of the tent. But they found them and maimed. And like I said, some of them had even had their tongues ripped out and things. Others appeared to have radiation burns and things like that. I don't think it was an avalanche. I mean, there might have been an ensuing avalanche and an avalanche later or something but some of those are just, there's no explanation for. And there's other somewhat similar cases where, something happened. The Yuma County 5, I think, Drew Beeson, I've had him on the show before. He wrote a book about that where the guys were on their way, I think it's a basketball game or something, and they went missing, and they found them in various states of frozen to death, and I think they all died. There might have been one that made it. A lot of this I cover so many, it gets kind of mixed up in my head. But what got after them? What scared them so bad that they wouldn't go out and try to find help? And they had a cabin there with adequate food and enough firewood and stuff, but they hadn't touched anything. And it's like they were scared to start a fire. I've got a story that I covered on 13 Past Midnight about a guy that's supposedly a true story. He was on the old Route 66, which is out here close to where I am, the Four Corners area. He was driving from, I think, Albuquerque to his parents in Utah, and was traveling the old Route 666. It's 421 now because people kept stealing the sign, and a lot of the people didn't like the name anyway. But there's some dark magic. There's some tribal magic in there. Supposedly there's warring tribes there that put curses and spells and things on each other. And he had something chase him, which it sounds like a wolf man or a dog man or something like that. And he finally sought refuge in an abandoned trailer that he found. He thought somebody lived there. Nobody came to the door. He just opened it, went inside, and found it to be abandoned. The thing had followed him. It's the Harry Hitchhiker Route 666 is, I think, what I made the title of the video. But he would pass this thing. The first time he passed it, it just looked like some kind of weird hitchhiker. And then half hour later down the road, he passes it again. It's the same creature. Nobody has driven past him. And each time he sees it, it's a little shaggier and a little shaggier. And his dorm mate back at school was a native. And he called him and he said, yeah, that's a shapeshifter. That's a skinwalker. And you want to stay away from that. And this thing followed him for miles and then trapped him inside this little place and was sitting on his car. And he said by that point it had become like a werewolf type creature. It didn't even look human anymore. And his friend told him, just stay there, just stay put. It'll have to leave by daylight. It has to have to go back home or go back to wherever it's going. But that should be the end of it unless it's marked you. So these things have a way of attaching themselves to you. Now, I never heard any more of the story. The person that I got the story from, I got it secondhand. They got it from the person that it happened to, but I never heard if he had any experiences or not. But he had gone that direction to save money and just try to drive it straight through, being a poor college kid. But after that, he decided to take a different route and maybe drive during the daytime and not try to make it at night. But you hear that out here. I'm right at the edge of the Navajo Nation reservation. The Dine is what they prefer to be called. There's all kinds of stories out here. The older people just will not talk about it. But I've met some younger people. There's a guy that go through his line a lot of times at the post office, and I've given him some stickers and stuff, and he watched the channel. Next time I was in, he said, I want to talk to you. So I'm waiting to hear what he has to say. But you mentioned Mount Shasta. I was up there back in the spring. I spoke at a UFO conference in San Francisco and planned it to travel from Oregon, spend a couple of days at Shasta. And then that place, it calls you, it pulls to you. I mean, when you're coming down the I-5 and you go around that first big turn and you see it off in the distance, I wanted to pull over and just look at it. But there's something about that mountain. I had an interview I did the other day with a girl that lived in the Bay Area, and she felt Shasta's call all the way from there. She dropped everything and went up and lived on Mount Shasta in a tent for 5 months. She calls them tree people, but she had Bigfoot experiences. She had a UFO experience, all kinds of things. And I can't wait to go back. And I was out, it was about 2:00 in the morning. I'd stayed in McLeod, which is just the next little town over from Shasta proper. I had a cabin over there. And I'd gone out about 2:00 in the morning to have a cigarette. And I saw lights up on the mountain. It reminded me of the Brown Mountain lights, but much, much bigger. I mean, these things would have been the size of an airliner. And even during the day, McLeod was weird. It's like a ski town, and there was nobody there because it wasn't ski season. So literally, I mean, the cabin that I stayed at, they only came like once a week and cleaned them and stuff. There was nobody else there. But I was outside getting something out of the car. You know that feeling you get when somebody's staring at you? I mean, just like staring hard, watching you. And I whipped around expecting to see somebody, and there over my shoulder is Mount Shasta. There's a really good view from there. It was like the mountain was watching me. And I've heard all kinds of stories up there. There's all kinds of legends and lore. Lemurians, ascended masters, Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs. It's supposedly like an airport for UFOs. And two of the most amazing Bigfoot stories I've ever heard came from Mount Shasta. A lady was there one spring and claimed to see what she claimed was a female Sasquatch giving birth on in a meadow there on Mount Shasta. And then about a year later, another lady, they didn't know each other. The stories weren't even related, but she was in the same area and saw what she described as a female Sasquatch breastfeeding a baby Sasquatch in the same meadow. So it sounds like they encountered the same cryptid, hominid, inhumanoid, whatever you want to call it, at a year apart. One lady saw it giving birth, the other saw it nursing the young. So it's a strange place. It's just one of those places. Joshua Tree, California is like that. The what they call the Oregon vortex down around Crater Lake. There's a power. There's something there that it draws people.
You know, you talk about power and drawing people, and you even mentioned a little bit earlier in the discussion about, we have the indigenous or First Nations people, tribal people that centuries ago, maybe 100 years ago, that they had cursed their land. Something might have went on. Maybe it was the settlers to get rid of settlers, or maybe it was settlers coming in and pillaging their tribal nation. And then they cast a shadow, or they cast a hex on the land. Do you think that, can you attribute any of this to any of the missing, or do you think this is just folklore?
I think it has something to do with it. We've noticed, and again, this is not anything new. Now, there are other missing channels that think they've discovered something, but back even in the 30s, Charles Fort wrote about the places that with certain names. Lauren Coleman wrote about it in his book Mysterious America back in 1983, expounding on what Ford had wrote on. He called it the name game, where a lot of times places that has devil or Diablo or something weird, a witch or ghost, whatever in the name, then stuff will happen there. Now, there's a couple different theories on that. The stuff happened there because it's named that way, or did it get that name from, say, First Nations people or whoever because of the things that happened there? But Devil's Tower, Devil's Gulch, Devil's Triangle, just anything with a devil, Diablo, whatever, Devil's Highway, there will be missing people there. That family that went missing, it was early last year, I think, where they found them on the trail where they had all expired, like in the middle of the trail. The man had sat down. They found him deceased sitting up. The baby was there with him. It had perished too, sadly. The wife was a few feet away, face down on the trail. The dog had laid down there with him, and it had expired. That was in a place called Devil's Gulch. So what happened to those people? They tried to blame it on algae blooms or a gas leak or something, but this is out in the woods. And there were a couple of deputies, or I'm not sure what county or what unit they're with, but they actually had to sit there with the bodies overnight till they could come in there and get them out. Why didn't it affect them if it was gas or a bloom or something? And then it was, it was a heat stroke. They ran out of water. Well, the guy had, I think, a liter or more water in his Camelback pack. The dog wouldn't have stayed there and died. The dog would have went down to the river and got a drink. I mean, animals are loyal and faithful to you, but if you don't feed them and don't water them, they'll wander off. A dog will look for food. They can smell water. They can smell something deep. But for all three of them to perish right there in the middle of the trail, that's just weird.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is weird. And it's so funny you bring up like certain places are named after the devil or Satan or whatever.
Yeah.
We've got a Hell, Michigan. Okay, it's up in the thumb. I've never been through, but I've read up on it a little bit. I'm like, because anything that said Hell, Michigan. I live in Michigan, so of course I'm interested.
Yeah.
And middle of nowhere, and some of the stories I've read on that very haunting area. For it doesn't have a big population, and for the size of the population, excuse me, versus mysterious disappearances, murder, is quite high for the population. So I think that these places were named these places for a reason. Now, story goes though that Hell, Michigan was bought by some rich guy and he renamed it to Hell, Michigan. So that might, kind of foil my thought on that. And I don't even know if that's true or not, because a lot of these things you really got to do a lot of digging to find the core of it. But I'm totally in agreement with you. A lot of these things are named certain things. They just got that aura about them.
Yeah. And again, did they get that name because of what happened there, or does that name draw things there? And it's not just Devil Diablo stuff. It's like Lenore, Lenoir, Lenore, literally the dark in French, or the black. A lot of things happen in places with that name. Another interesting one is any Lafayette, Fayetteville, anything like that. All that's named after the Fey folk, the fairies, and that's another thing to me that's really interesting. If you get into the study of the Fey folklore, and particularly in the Celtic countries where that was and probably still is almost like a religion. I mean, those people believed in that stuff. That ties everything together under that one umbrella. Now, UFO people, Bigfoot people, Dogman people, they believe what they believe. But the minute you mention the fairy folk or the fae, they'll kind of giggle at you like, fae, fairies, haha, okay. But if you look into the legends and the stories and dig back into the 1800s, 1700s, farther back, there's all stories of those creatures that fit within the framework of the fae. There was one account I was reading from the early 1800s, and I think it's in Wales, where they talked about these little fae people that came out of the sky in a horseless carriage. That's a UFO encounter. There's a type of fae, an elemental, that's described as a hairy giant. There's your Bigfoot. The fae are known for stealing children, for playing pranks. There are none of them that are nice. They're hateful little beings. I think there's so many different types of them. I think pixies are the only ones that are even helpful to people. Susan Woodcarver, who's in the chat, we put a thing up on Christmas, on 13 past midnight, Christmas Eve, about the tomte, which are these little 3-inch dwarf type creatures that if you don't leave food out for them, they like, I think it's rice pudding or something with a pat of butter on it. They will do nasty things. Like in the video, we said they would hide your car keys, which are one of the things they do. They like to move things. But back in the day, the original legend, they would kill your cow. I mean, that was a time when you relied on your cow. So these are hateful, spiteful little creatures. Now, again, here you go off on another tangent. There's people that think the fae and those creatures are the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the ones that got kicked out of heaven with Satan. Who knows? It's everything is connected. That's what I'll say.
I think everything is connected, and it's funny because I always thought like there's the elementals, right? The fae, and I guess the elementals, from my point of view, is the protectors, the good of the woods. Then you hear like the fae could be, nefarious to a point, or even you hear about the jinn, which I guess is just which is nasty, right?
Yeah. And again, that all fits within the Nephilim.
Within.
The fae, the Nephilim above that, and then it just kind of everything trickles down, and that explains everything. But again, people that do serious research and stuff, they don't want to hear about the fae.
Yes.
So
I've even heard accounts about, you talk about the fallen angels, and we did a show on this several months ago about the fallen angels. That, of course, they all don't fall to earth. Some are like in the spirit world, or some are in our atmosphere, but some hit the ocean. A lot of people theorize that perhaps some fallen angels are actually mermaids or sirens.
wouldn't surprise me. It's just, a lot of those old legends and stuff that would account for it. Werewolves, that's supposedly a human creature, but what is it? Somebody that's had a curse or a spell put on them by something other. Same with Dogman or Bigfoot. Or I've got a story on my channel called The Thing in the Ditch, and I encountered something that I couldn't see that chased me out of the area, and it was big enough, Rob, that it was moving the tree branches way up above my head, kicking up leaves. I could feel the ground shaking. It was stomping so hard, but there was nothing there. And years later, I was at a party. It happened a couple of times. Once when I was 8, and once when I was 15. It's a long story. Go over there if you want to hear the whole thing.
Yeah.
But years later, I was at a party where I didn't know anybody other than the guy that I was with, and I just knew him from work. We went to a party after work. Some girls found a Ouija board under the host's couch. They got it out, were messing around with it, and they were going around the room asking people stuff. They got to me. I thought, okay, I've got a good one. Only thing I said, and nobody there knew the story except for me, not even the guy I worked with. I said, what scared me when I was a kid? And so the Ouija board, they get it going there, and it's doing its little infinity symbol, that figure 8, and it spelled out WATERSPRITE. They looked at me, and I'm just like, I don't know. And they were laughing. Oh, it's thirsty. Get it some water. Get it a Sprite. Well, and this was in the days way before the internet. The next day I was off. I went to the big library in downtown Knoxville, and I went up to the reference librarian. I said, what can you tell me about a water sprite or a water spirit? She goes off into the stack. She comes out with this big stack of books. And there's a type of elemental. There's and I can never remember which one it is. One is a guardian of the forest, and the other is a guardian of the water. There's a naiad and a dryad. And technically they're part of that whole Fey realm. Well, this property where this happened, it was on my parents' farm. It's a small farm, like 26 acres. But on that piece of property, and within a short distance where this occurred, there were 7 natural springs. 6 of them flowed out of hillsides. The 7th one was an artesian one that came up out of the ground. So what better place to encounter a water spirit than a place where there's all this water? And whatever, I mean, it wasn't a little gossamer winged Tinkerbell type thing. It was big. I mean, like I said, you could see the tree branches getting knocked out of the way. The leaves were kicking up. I could feel the ground shake. And it chased me out of there. I was 8 years old, ran down the hill screaming. My mom heard me coming and came out on the back porch. I was about a quarter mile away to see what all the fuss was. My dad got home from work. My brother had stopped by. They went up there and looked. They could see where something had been there. Was it a deer? Was it a bear? No, I'd lived in the woods. And we went to the Smokies. I knew what all those things looked like. I kept saying I couldn't see whatever it was. It was invisible. And I didn't go back up there until I was 15. We were getting ready to move from there. And I was just, because that property was 26 acres and only 5 of it cleared off. So I had all kinds of woods and creeks and things to play in. And I'm just kind of taking one last look around, knowing that I'd never see it again under the same circumstances. And I walked back up there and peered down into that ditch. And curiously enough, I found out later through research that ditch was actually the old road through the old stagecoach road, dating back as far as the Revolutionary War. But I was 15. I'm, not really afraid now. And I'm up there, I'm looking around, I'm like, wonder what scared me. And I peered down in the ditch, and I turned to walk away. It was about 12 feet from the bank down into where the roadway was, the dirt road. And I turned to walk away, and I hear this familiar sound, something running into the leaves. I turn around, I look, it comes up over the lip of the ditch. Same exact thing. I couldn't see it. It's knocking tree limbs out of the way. The leaves are kicking up. I didn't run screaming and crying that time, but I didn't waste any time getting out of there. That was the last time I was there when I was 15. Haven't been back since. No real desire to go back. But whatever it was me that it didn't want around there. I even had a kid come home from school with me one time. I didn't tell him what was up. I didn't tell that story to anybody. And I said, John, go up there and look in the ditch and tell me if you see anything. I'm going to stay down here, down the hill behind this tree. So I'm down there peeking around the tree. He walks up, doo-doo-doo. He doesn't know what's going on. He's standing at the edge of the ditch. He's looking down in there. And then in a few minutes, he's just like, I don't see nothing. I'm like, okay, come on. And I said, my dad, my brother went up there. It didn't want me up there for some reason.
Wow. Steve, that's something, man. I could talk to you all night long. I got to tell you something. We've talked about today in an hour and a half already cryptids. We've talked about ghosts, the missing paranormal,
UFOs,
the missing
time shifts.
Why don't we everything, and we did it all in an hour and a half. We got to leave our audience with one more. You got anything that's like from the alien realm that you can leave with our fantastic audience and people out in chat tonight?
Well, the only thing, like I said, I had the missing time thing.
Yes.
But as far as aliens, and again, I don't know if this qualifies, but I
Right.
had a black-eyed kids encounter back in the
Okay, let's
90s.
do it.
And it's a long story. I've got it over on my channel. It takes about 25 minutes to tell it. But I think like the MIB, the BEK, they're all related. I think it does have something to do with the whatever there's I've heard people put forth the theory that there's a cosmic prankster out there, and it sends out these things. The men in black, they wear nice clothes, they drive cars, but they speak weird, and the clothes are out of fashion, and the cars, although they look brand new, they're old. The black-eyed kids. Who doesn't like kids? But these are creepy kids that come to your door in the middle of the night. They have black eyes. They want to be let in. Saying, well, that didn't work. Let's try clowns. Everybody loves clowns, but these are creepy clowns that come out of the woods with machetes and stuff. And I've often joked, if they ever decide to send out black-eyed bikini models with pizza and metal albums, you'll know what got me. Because if that came to my door, I'd probably open it. But I had this encounter, and it was these two little girls. And again,
okay, that's what I'm. Okay, good. Yeah, I know it's a long story. Briefly though, was that? I know it's on. You can find it on Steve's channel, but that's the two little girls that came up to your car door, correct? If I remember.
Yeah, I was doing some networking. I used to do IT work. I was putting in a network for a medical center.
Yeah.
I'd go in after hours and work. I had a day job at the time too. Came out to my car about 2:00 in the morning, far into the parking lot. And this is in like a medical industrial area that nobody lived around there. There's these two little girls sitting on the curb. And I thought, well, that's weird. And I'm guessing the smaller one appeared to be 9 or 10. The older one appeared to be 12 or 13. I'm just going by size.
Sure.
They're wearing plain clothing, hoodies, got the hoods pulled up, and they're just sitting over there. Well, I'm driving a little Mazda Miata at the time. My arms are loaded with stuff. I'm trying to pack it in the trunk. Network equipment, a spool of Cat5 cable, all this stuff. It was like playing Tetris. And every time I look over, they've stood up, and every time I look, they're a little bit closer. And I never actually saw them walk, but every time I look over, they're a little closer. And when they got up under the street light, by that time they were about halfway to me, and I could see their faces. They had no eyes. It was just black. I mean, like inky blackness. And the taller one, I'm assuming the older one, had started talking. He'll let us in. He'll give us a ride. He won't leave us out here. It's cold. It's dark. We're lost. Well, it was all those things, except it wasn't cold. It was in the summertime. That made no sense. But it was almost like a recording. She would repeat the same things over and over and over and over. The little one didn't speak. And they kept getting closer and closer. By this time, I'm sketched out. I mean, I've never felt a fear like that. That's the one time. I mean, I've had a couple of times when I was really scared, but I was absolutely scared to death. And of what? Of two little girls in a parking lot? It was just this irrational fear that just rolled over me in waves. And there was an evil. There was a demonic something there. And I believe, I don't even know if I really saw two little girls or if it was just something so hideous that's what my mind put up there, like Whitley Strieber and his owls, or if that's how it was presenting itself, again, like the MIB, the BEK, whatever, to try to get me to, and I wasn't going to let them in my car. I was so frightened I couldn't even get in my car. I kept fumbling my keys. This is a convertible. I'd left the top down. It was summertime. I ended up jumping over the door into the seat, fumbled the keys again, finally fired it up, and I drove down through the lawn of the place instead of backing out like a normal person and fled. And instead of going, I was staying with my girlfriend at the time. She lived close to where my day job was. So if I worked late, I could go there and crash for a few hours. Instead, I go the opposite direction, go to my parents' house all the way in Oak Ridge, half-hour away. And the whole time there, I'm tearing down this 4-lane connector that goes from Oak Ridge to the interstate and the airport on the other end. I'm doing like 90 and 100 miles an hour down there. And I'm looking over my shoulder. I'm looking in my rearview mirror. In my mind, I was seeing these little girls either holding on to the car or running along beside the car, just, things that didn't make any sense. I mean, look over in the seat. Did they get in? Did they get in? They got right up to the door, but they never offered to get. I mean, would have had to invite them in or open the door and let them in. And I never felt anything other than fear and contempt for them until just a couple of years ago. I let somebody else tell my story for a show they were doing. and it touched me. It hit me emotionally. I thought, oh, those poor little girls, and I just left them out there. But it wasn't little girls. It was, or if it was, something evil was controlling them. Something out there. It was, I don't know. And I've had people ask me, would you want to see them again? Part of me, the answer is not no, but hell no. And the other part is maybe, just to see if I would react differently this time, if I was expecting it, or if it'd be the same way. But the most irrational, most overwhelming. I mean, anytime I talk about it, I get nervous. My palms sweat. There's a kind of a PTSD that goes with it.
Well, Steve, I think that's a good spot to end it, because now I'm a little creeped out, and it's, it's 10 o'clock, 10:42 p.m. here. So now I've got to kind of, let
And
the
when I
breath
tell
out,
that
right?
story, strange things happen. So lock your doors a little
Oh,
bit.
thank you very much for that, Steve. I have enough creepy things that go on.
But
Hey,
if
let
you
me
want to hear
ask.
the whole story in its entirety, go to 13 Past
Yeah,
Midnight. Tanya Jones from Unicorp's Tales interviewed me. It's
yeah,
about 25 minutes long.
yeah.
And
Steve, why don't you pass on where we can find you across all your platforms? What's going on?
again, I'm on Missing Persons and Mysteries. That's just what it sounds like. The main focus will always be missing people, but the mystery side of that, we cover a lot of different ground. Sometimes 13 Past Midnight. I'm on Bandcamp, stevestockton.bandcamp.com. That's pure storytelling over there. Some of it fiction, some of it real. Got a book up there of frightening horror stories that are fiction. Got a book up there for an audio book, Barton Nunnally, called Weird World. And then I've got one coming from Rob if I can ever finish getting all the audio edited. But
Yeah,
go and
yeah.
follow me on there. And again, my books are on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. Strange Things in the Woods, My Strange World, and National Park Mysteries and Disappearances, Volume 1, 2, and 3. First was the Great Smokies, and it's not just missing persons, the mystery side of it. There's ghost stories, there's native folklore, there's a little bit of everything in here. Second volume is parts of California, Joshua Tree, Mount Shasta, and Yosemite. And then the third volume is the Pacific Northwest, where I just moved to the desert from Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. But and if I've given some copies away over on my channel. I've got channel memberships open on 13 Past Midnight. And if you become a member of the channel, less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks for a month, you get members only chat, you get giveaways, you get little badges beside your name and custom emojis. A lot of fun. So come check me out.
Yeah, please check out Steve Stockton. And Steve, once again, thank you on short notice for joining me. That always helps out in the pinch. Thank you to everybody in chat. Thank you to everybody that listening now, listening later. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube to Steve Stockton, Missing Person Mysteries, 13 Past Midnight. And of course, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. Subscribe to Texas Front Porch. And my buddy out there in chat, World Bigfoot Radio. I always got to give out Duke a shout. He started me on my journey 5 years ago. I always appreciate you, buddy. With that being said, until next time, BMR and Steve Stockton, we're out.
See you, little friend.